G'day, I'm Warwick Schiller. I recently came back from Argentina where I participated in a thing called the Gaucho Derby Academy. Last year I signed up for a 500 kilometre horse race in Argentina called the Gaucho Derby, and it goes across the 500 kilometres of the Patagonian region of Argentina, starting out in way out kind of in the middle of Argentina, and you end up really close to Mount Fitzroy, which is where the finish line is. If you've ever seen the clothing brand Patagonia, and they have there's a jagged kind of a peak logo on there, that's actually an outline of the skyline there at Mount Fitzroy. And I signed up for this Gaucho Derby after having a lady named Stevie Delahunt on the podcast, on my Journey On podcast. And she got me intrigued about the whole thing. You know, I'd ridden camels 300 kilometers across the Gobi Desert in Mongolia, so I figured I can ride a horse 500 kilometers across Patagonia. And I was supposed to actually be there February 2023, and they postponed the race till February 2024. So I actually went down there for what they call the Gaucho Derby Academy, which, you know, the race itself, the Gaucho Derby, it's a survival race. So when you do the race, it's over 10 days. You ride 5 horses over 10 days, and you carry on your saddlebags. You carry your tent, your sleeping bag, your jet boil, your food. It's quite the beast of a race, and. Anyway, so when I first signed up for the Gaucho Derby and said something about it on social media, I had some people say, well, how could you be involved in something like that? You know, like they don't treat their horses very well, and, you know, you're supposed to be attuned and whatever. And so in this video, I'm just going to talk a little bit about how I worked on some attunement and connection with the horses down there. But before I do, I want to make sure no one that watches this gets into judgment. You know, different cultures do different things, interact with each other differently, interact with animals differently. And down there in Argentina, they interact with their horses a certain way. It's not necessarily the way I interact with horses, but it's what they do. It's what their father did. It's what their grandfather did. They've been doing it for a long time. So, you know, let's see if we can keep any negative comments out of this. And I wasn't sure when that person posted that comment. I thought, well, I don't know if I can, you know, have an attuned, connected outlook when interacting with these horses. I've not been there. I don't know how the horses are. I don't know much about the whole situation. When we went down for the Gaucho Derby Academy, we were there for 6 days. They taught us, like map reading skills. We had medics there from a group called Intrepid Medics, and they're medics for like all sorts of adventure races around the world. So we had medical training, and then we got to ride the horses. And in the end, we went to go out and camp for a couple of nights and gather a group of wild horses and bring them back to the estancia, which is basically the estate or the ranch. But anyway, I want to tell you about my interaction with the horses. So how the Argentinians catch their horses, these are their ridden horses. It's a bit of a schmozzle, but that's how they do it. And sometimes they will tie a rope to a fence, a big long rope, and stretch that rope around, herd the horses into it, and then they will go up and try to catch them that way. And it seems like the horses, they read your intentions so much, like as soon as one of those gauchos would look at a horse, its head would turn and it would go to the back of the pack, which I thought was interesting. So the first day I observed them catching one group of horses like that, and then another group of horses they had in a big pen, and this is where my horse came from. And there was just a lot of chasing and running around and dust flying, and that's how they catch their horses. And so when I first got my first horse, they caught him like that, and then they brought him to me and they said he needs to be hobbled to be saddled. I'm like, okay, if you think so. And so the gaucho actually, the gauchos don't know, any of us on this academy, how well we can ride and whether we know anything about horses, so they assume we know nothing. So they hobbled this horse, and then they basically saddled him for me. So the first day that we went out for a ride, when we were coming back on the ride, I asked the organisers, I said, because we're coming back about 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, so we're going to be done for the day. I said, is there any chance I can, when everybody turns their horses loose, can I stay back and mess with this horse a little bit in these pens? And they said, yeah, sure, no problem. So what I did was, after everybody turned their horses loose and they went off to, all the other people went off to drink Malbec. I don't drink wine, so I got one of those smallish pens. It's actually the pen that they had the rope around the horses in the first morning. I turned him loose in there, and then I did an exercise that I call creating connection through change in focus. And I've shared a lot of videos on this. Back in 2020, I did a series on YouTube called Reconnecting with Your Horse During Coronavirus. And so there was, this exercise was in that. So I basically did a version of that. And, with that exercise, what I'll do is I'll turn a horse loose, and I'll start a long way away from them and, work on communicating my awareness of their awareness, basically. And in the end, they always end up, they'll just follow you. Like in the start, they want nothing to do with you. And by the end of the session, they'll follow you around. But there's no pressure put on them. It's all about communicating, like I said, communicating your awareness of their awareness. And that's what creates the connection. So I turned him loose in that pen. I didn't have usually I do it with a flag. I just got a piece of plastic out of the garbage bin there, and I would just pull it out of my pocket and make a little bit of a noise with it. And when he looked at me, or flicked an ear towards me, I'd just put it away. But by the end of that session, this horse, at the start, he would want to have nothing to do with me. And in that session, he kind of followed me around that pen there. And so then I thought, well, I'm going to work on saddling him without the hobbles, because they said you need to hobble him to saddle him. And there was a number of horses there that most of the horses they had to hobble to saddle. So I worked on that, and I ended up saddling him right there with no hobbles, and he was perfectly fine. So I turned him loose back out in the pasture they had there by those yards, by those pens. And so the next morning, or the next afternoon, I think, because we had medical briefing the next morning, but that next afternoon they brought the horses in, and I went to go and, what I did was, I didn't want the gauchos to go in and catch him, so I went in and caught him first. And that creating connection through change in focus exercise, I've done it a lot, but I always have control over the situation. I'll put the horse on their own in an arena, and I'll work there. So this horse was in a pen full of 20 other horses. It's the same pen full of horses he was in the day before when they were trying to catch him. And it was interesting. Whenever I looked at him, he would just turn his head and go to the back of the pack, like hide behind him. And, when I first walked in, though, they all kind of start milling around like someone's going to start chasing us around here in a minute. And so I basically did the same exercise while focusing on him and ignoring all the other horses. And I did it. None of the horses got running around. Nobody broke into a trot. There was no dust. And it took me probably, half an hour. But at the end of half an hour, without chasing him around or putting any pressure on or whatever, I got to where he rolled around and faced me, and most of those other horses rolled around and stood behind me, and he just stood there, and I just walked up and put the halter on him. And so that was kind of cool, because I, like I said, I always have control of that situation. I never get, people ask me, can you do it in a group? I don't know. I've never tried it in a group, but I tried it there in a group, and it worked. I wish I had a video of it, because it was pretty darn cool. So that's the part about that I wanted to share. I'm going to do a few videos on my experience in the Gaucho Derby. If you want to know about it, I'm in the Gaucho Derby Academy. If you want to know more about it sooner, I've just released a podcast on the Journey On podcast about my experiences there. So if you want to have a listen to that, you could learn a lot more about it. But anyway, that's my bit of a story about how I used attunement and connection at the Gaucho Derby Academy, and now I have more of an idea of how I'm going to use that when I do the actual Gaucho Derby in 2024.